They descended through a column of water the color of old ink, the submersible's lights carving thin, pale paths into the dark. The wreck resolved below them like a cathedral gone to sea. Ribs of steel, a collapsed promenade, an inventory of vanished lives scattered across the seabed. The team had mapped familiar rooms for years, but tonight the camera found an anomaly. A shadowed cavity tucked beneath twisted decking, a pocket of space that had somehow stayed whole. As the beam swept across it, shapes shimmered into form. Curved fenders, round headlights, a pair of handlebars caught in a halo of silt. Motorcycles, not the kind of cargo anyone expected to find in the Titanic's broken belly. And yet there they were, aligned like relics in a private museum. The first impression was of scale and surprise. These were classic machines, full-bodied and muscular even under a century of salt. One machine bore a tank with a hand-painted emblem. Another's leather seat still held the imprint of a rider's weight. Around them lay packing materials, rot-stiff canvas, lengths of hemp rope, a crate corner stamped with the name of a New York consignor. A ledger entry later uncovered in archival searches would tie them to a single name, an American merchant whose business moved luxury goods and mechanical curiosities between continents. He had boarded with a trunk of engines and parts, and the motorcycles were apparently his private consignment, prized possessions intended for display, sale, or perhaps a private garage that never received them. The encounter beneath the waves was immediate theater. The ROV's lights picked out chromework eaten away into filigree and brass fittings, encrusted with mineral bloom, turning handlebars into coral lace. Fish threaded between spokes. Anemones had taken root in air intakes. The machines had become islands of life. For the divers and pilots, that mix of technology and biology demanded humility. This was not a cargo hold full of inert objects. It was a space where human craft and ocean ecology had entered into an uneasy accord. Recovery planning began with documentation. Photogrammetry captured every angle. Laser scanners produced textured 3D meshes that would allow the team to study the layout without disturbing it. Specialists catalogued makers' marks and serial stamps visible through concretions. The conservation team argued for restraint, retrieve what was necessary to tell the story, and leave the rest to the sea's ownership. That was the first ethical line: balance curiosity and scholarship against the site's status as both archaeological archive and a memorial. When the decision was made to recover one machine for study, the operation was surgical. Soft cradles were fitted, slings cushioned with dampened fabric, and ascent rates controlled to minimize stress on metal and losses of remaining leather. The machine surfaced clotted in black water, its curves dark beneath droplets that caught decklight like tiny stars. In the lab, the real work began. Desalination baths to coax salt from pores, microscopic cleaning to reveal stamped cereals, metallurgical analysis to determine alloys and original finishes. It was slow, patient labor, less plunder than palliative. Carrot analysis spoke to an era of craftsmanship and global trade. The engines carried foundry marks tied to a mid-Atlantic works known to export to wealthy American collectors. Hand-painted emblems and custom saddlery suggested a bespoke commission rather than factory run. A small brass plate hidden beneath a creted crust bore initials that matched those in a shipping manifest: the merchants. Documents located in family papers hinted at motive. He collected machines not merely as mobility, but as status, evidence of modernity to be displayed in salons and garages where metal met taste. But provenance alone did not make the story tidy. The presence of motorcycles aboard a transatlantic liner raised questions about the intersection of wealth, risk, and mobility in the early 20th century. Why ship such valuable, cumbersome items on a passenger vessel touted as the pinnacle of comfort? Researchers suggested plausible answers. The merchant was relocating his showroom, sending pieces for an exhibition, or transporting bespoke commissions to American patrons. Whatever the reason, the machines were emblematic, a material culture of speed and progress stowed in a ship that embodied both technological confidence and human fallibility. The diver's relationship with the machines was both practical and poetic. Some recounted the surreal feeling of seeing a headlight lens, once meant to cut through fog, now encrusted with coral and aglow in the ROV's beam. Others described smaller intimacies, a cigarette butt lodged in a saddlebag seam, the faded pattern of stitching on a glove, a child's carved wooden horse half buried beneath a crate nearby. These traces humanized the machines. They were not trophies, but companions to lives interrupted. Marine life had appropriated the machines in ways that complicated recovery. Tiny crustaceans nested in carburetor throats, tube worms threaded manifold openings. Biologists on the team catalogued species and argued for minimal disturbance, aware that the wreck functioned as an emergent reef. Where removal was necessary, protocols required pre-removal surveys and a plan for relocating organisms where feasible. The challenge was to respect the object's cultural value without erasing the ecological community that had taken it as home. Public messaging posed another ethical knot. Headlines loved the romance of Titanic motorcycles recovered, but the project's leaders insisted on context. Exhibits were designed to foreground process. Video loops showed the machine in situ, the ROV's cautious approach, and the conservation steps that followed. Transparent cases displayed small recovered components, an emblem plate, a leather strap, accompanied by panels discussing ownership, the merchant's biography, and the moral calculus of retrieving items from her gravesite. Descendants were consulted. Their voices helped shape narrative framing and exhibition language. Scholars found in the machines opportunities to ask broader questions. Economic historians used shipping data to map trade in luxury goods. Social historians read the objects as signifiers of status and mobility. Technology historians traced the diffusion of mechanical design across continents. One fascinating thread emerged from chemical residues. Trace oils in a crankcase matched formulations produced by an American lubricant maker that advertised to elite motorists and race teams. The machines were not just artifacts, they were nodes. In networks of consumption and performance, conservators worked like surgeons. Leather cured in humidity chambers, metal underwent electrolytic reduction to remove corrosive salts. Paint analysis reconstructed original palettes. At one point, a conservator uncovered a small folded photograph hidden in a toolbox cavity. A family portrait with a young man in a leather jacket, one hand resting possessively on a motorcycle, much like the ones now under study. The image made the stakes intimate. The bikes were not only examples of industrial art, but objects threaded into personal histories. When the recovered machine finally entered public view, curators debated tone. They avoided triumphalism. The display emphasized the layered story: machine as technology, object as witness, wreck as grave, and ocean as actor. A companion film showed divers' first impressions, scientists' careful work, and interviews with a descendant who spoke of a grandfather who had loved mechanical wonders. Visitors responded with a mix of fascination and quiet reflection. School groups leaned close to screens that let them rotate a 3D scan, while older visitors read ledger extracts and letters. The project's debates continued in academic journals and public forums. Some critics argued that any recovery from a site containing human remains was problematic. Others countered that preservation and study could honor the dead by making their stories accessible and preventing further degradation. The team's answer was procedural: strict documentation, consultation with stakeholders, limits on what would be recovered, and an explicit goal to use recovered objects primarily for research and education, not commercial gain. In the quiet, moments away from press and pixels, the divers recalled the first dive like a ritual. Our pilot described the instant the cameras cleared the silt and caught the curve of a fender. It was like finding a sleeping animal, silent, muscular, somehow alive. That image lingered in their retelling. Machines as living things, animated by the gestures that once rode them, and now animated by the sea. When the lights finally swept the empty hold one last time, the frame felt both fuller and lonelier. The machines that stayed behind returned to their slow post-human life, colonized by reef and current. The one that rose to the light carried with it a story stitched from archives, metal, and family memory. The exhibit that followed did not promise answers so much as a conversation about technology and taste, about who owns the past, and about how we treat objects that bridge industry and intimacy. At the end of the film loop in the gallery, there is always a shot of the ocean at night, black water under a canopy of stars. The camera pulls back until the wreck is a faint silhouette on the seafloor. In that image, the motorcycles become metaphors, monuments to movement that the sea has paused, objects that remind us of how fragile progress can be when measured against time. Viewers leave with a sense that recovery is not about possession, but about stewardship. A pledge, however imperfect, to listen before we lift, and to remember the people who once revved an engine to go somewhere they never reached.